Uh, Hello, this is Becky Wiglin from the National Balloon Museum, and this is Lou Ballonis, and what's the date?
May 30th.
May 30th, 2017, and we are going to be talking about Steve Fossett, and Lou was his meteorologist on many of his flights, plus his bicycle and sailboat, and we're going to learn all about how Steve used the weather to do what he did. So, Lou?
Well, thank you. By way of rest of the introduction for historical purposes,
Okay.
just let me tell you I'm a Shields Tagger BFA award recipient,
Okay.
and I've done almost 20 to 30 BFA national balloon events as the event meteorologist, all the way from starting with Pickard Field and Simpson College to those out out East Coast and all over the place, and so lots of hot air ballooning, besides being a hot air balloon pilot and a meteorologist.
Well, we need them all.
Very good.
So, how did you meet Steve Fossett?
Well, I was doing the hot air ballooning and was pretty much at the top of the game, having done a whole bunch of national events and weekend events and sporting events, and I was, but I was not doing gas balloon. It was all hot air, and as a balloon pilot meteorologist, it gave me that little extra edge. So as I say, I was at the top of my game, and I had retired from the Air Force, where I was a meteorologist, and I was working as a government contractor, and one day I got a phone call from this guy named Steve Fossett. Now, I had no idea who Steve Fossett was. Could have been anybody. And he says he wanted to talk to me for a minute, and he started telling me about how he had this idea of flying across the Pacific solo. And of course, in my mind, I'm saying, geez, this guy's nuts. I said, you know, I'm around nutty balloonists all the time, and maybe I'm a nutty balloonist, but this guy is, no, too dangerous. And I had known that some Japanese fellow earlier had tried, or several, and perished. And there was a team, or maybe two teams, that had crossed earlier, but it was teams, several people in very large balloons. But as he was talking, he said he wanted to go solo, Korea to United States. Well, I politely refused him. And forgot all about it. Got a second call, maybe 2 or 3 days later, from Steve Fossett, saying, you know, you really ought to do this here, and I'll help you. And I said, no. A couple of days again passed, and then I got a phone call from Bob Rice. And just let me tell you, Bob Rice, in my opinion, is really the pioneer meteorologist for ballooning. Bob Rice was at the really top of his game. And Bob Rice was saying, hey, you better listen to this guy, Steve Fossett. And he started telling me all about what Steve used to do in terms of breaking records and all of that. And I told Bob, who I had not known, but I was very impressed that Bob Rice would talk to me. I said, Bob, you know, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do gas. I'm a hot air guy, not a gas guy. And Bob said, well, he would be doing this Fossett flight, but Bob Rice was doing the America's Cup sailboat meteorology at the same time. And Bob said, I'll teach you how to do gas ballooning meteorology and how to use something called trajectory analysis to forecast the track of a balloon. And with that, and then I said, okay, well, I'll listen to him. So Steve Fossett made the third call, and instead of using his normal a pitch about going across the Pacific, of which I was now interested in, he went into the financial arrangements. Well, that didn't take long. Like a half a second. And having been just retired and just working as a come here, come there contractor, I said, yeah, okay, well, I'm kind of interested. So that's how I met him, was by a series of phone calls, and with the insistence and help of Bob Rice.
Now, I don't know who Bob Rice is either, so can you tell me
Oh, wow.
where he comes from?
Bob Rice is a meteorologist, he's passed away, and he started in balloon meteorology as a meteorologist 30, 40 years ago when they were just brand new balloons. But his claim to fame was as the meteorologist for the America's Cup sailboat racing. And that's where he bumped into Steve Fossett.
Is this how, did he show you how to do that with the sailboats and
No,
stuff like that
no,
too?
no. Interesting enough, Bob Rice, until he passed away, was top. Every one team that he supported won the America's Cup.
Really?
He was really, really a top. And when I went to San Diego to apprentice under him.
So he lives in California?
No,
Or
he
lived?
lives back lived back in Massachusetts
Massachusetts.
someplace. But he went to San Diego, and I went down to San Diego to have him show me trajectories. But as I went into his work area, he had everything covered up. He wasn't going to show me his secret
Yeah.
for sailboat races. And to this day, as far as I know, it's a close hold secret on how you support sailboats
Really?
to get that edge in the meteorology, and to the point where Bob Rice would forecast the exact wind down to the knot, and based on that forecast of the wind down to the knot, the sailboat team would select the exact sails that they would use.
Wow.
And when he would forecast whether there's so many knots this way, and then you make a turn and so many knots this way, they would put other sails in the sail locker of the boat to switch the sails and all that. His forecasting for America's Cup was precise.
So he really knew what he was doing
Yes.
as far as meteorology.
He really knew how to put sport together. Now, the technique he used, and this is germane to Fossett and to gas ballooning, was something called trajectory analysis. I can't confirm or deny, and I shouldn't, but let me just say that it was developed by the Department of Defense during the Cold War as a military tool. And then it was declassified, and Bob Rice learned how to do it. Completely computer-based. And what it would do, what trajectory analysis would do, would take a parcel of air in the atmosphere. Just take a parcel. Take this parcel such that it has zero mass, zero weight, and float it along with the atmosphere and the winds. So this parcel, release a parcel from this point, release it, and let it float in the atmosphere, go up as the air would go up, and let it follow the pressure contours over a period of time, such that over a period of time you could predict where that parcel of air will be. And of course you had to give it certain parameters. It was all computerized, ran on supercomputers. You give it parameters such as is a parcel of air going to follow a constant pressure, or is it going to let temperature influence it? So you have to put your exact inputs. Well, Bob Rice found out how to take that, along with National Weather Service, parcel of air, and call it a balloon. Instead of a parcel of air, call it a balloon. And since balloons float along with the winds, and if you let the balloon go just free float, it'll go up in altitude as pressure changes, and down in altitude and all that. But if you fly it like an airplane, constant height above the surface, flight level, you change the parameters such that that parcel of air or balloon will fly a certain altitude above the earth, and you can calculate, based on a series of very sophisticated equations, where that parcel of air will be out to about 7 to 14 days.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
And that was, we're talking 20 years ago, 25 years ago, And that was a major, major breakthrough for ballooning. Now I'm surmising he also brought that down to the race courses of sailboats. But he showed me how to run the trajectory analysis, how to request a trajectory analysis from National Weather Service at Suitland, Maryland. I had to write up a little request. And in those days, we didn't have the internet, and we had the real crummy computers and the dial-up modems. So I would have to get a we didn't have laptops. I had to get a computer, a desktop computer, and I would type in the request for a trajectory. And then they, National Weather Service, would send that answer on that trajectory to the nearest weather station, and then I would drive to the weather station and pick up that trajectory, and then knowing where the balloon was going to launch from and all that, I could tell the pilot, well, at 12 hours from now you'll be here, 14 hours you'll be here, 24 hours you'll be here, and then I could draw the fronts and say, however, you'll be in a front here, so back up here, we need to get to a different altitude to lower the balloon to go around the front and all of that.
Wow.
So that was the technique that Bob Rice showed me, and that was the technique that Bob Rice suggested I use to get Steve Fossett across the Pacific. That's the first time that I know of that this trajectory analysis was used greater than 5 or 10 miles in distance, and the first time for a gas balloon certainly going a big distance across the Pacific.
Did you use that same technique in all the ones that
Yes.
you used?
From then on, I used trajectory analysis, and now all gas balloonists use it and all of that sort of stuff. So luckily enough, I was at the very edge of that technique.
So you were kind of the pioneer of the
Yes,
technique.
yes, and there's an old business expression, no mystery, no margin. You know, the more you have a mystery of a certain process or something, the more money you can charge.
Oh,
So I created my own company, and was very successful using trajectory analysis for 15 years after that
Really?
in support of many record-breaking balloon flights and all of that sort of stuff. But okay, so back to maybe Fossett and his first long-distance flight in a gas balloon. Steve Fossett, did not have any experiences in long-distance balloon flying of any sort. He was not a hot air balloon pilot. He didn't fly any long-distance gas balloon flights. He just wanted to do, his first one was going to be his big one. And so it
I
was.
think you'd work up to it, but
No.
he always did everything
He-
big, so.
Yes, and he said, okay, we're gonna do that. And he put together a team of the best people he could find. Now, at this point, do you want me to stop and go back to his other events prior to this? or
No,
this-
we'll just go on to
We'll
this,
go
we'll
with
do
this
them
one. All
at
right.
the end.
Okay, so the way Steve Fossett worked in general is he went out there and he researched who were the top leading experts in the event that he was going to do. So he got the top balloon company builder experts, the top people that built the burners, the top people for operations like Nick Somm and Comstock, Bruce Comstock. Got me on meteorology. I was the fill-in for Bob Rice, who was really the top, but I would, after this flight, I would kind of be the top. Because nobody had taken a balloon that far. The way
So what kind of a balloon did he choose?
He chose something called a Rosier.
Okay,
Other guys will have to explain it to you. I could, but let's not
yeah, I
do
know,
that
but
here.
I know.
It was
what
a Rosier of the correct height, the correct size. Only a Rosier could really make it across
Yeah,
the
'cause
Pacific.
it's half and half, yeah.
That distances where you, during the day, the heat takes you up, and at night you cool, and as you cool, you get rid of ballast so you don't go into the ground, and then now that you're lighter, the next day you go even higher, and you go this yo-yo effect, and you have to be very careful that you don't run out of ballast and that you don't run out of helium. And that'll come up in some of his later flights. So it's an up-down thing. So he got his team together in, and he took off for Korea. We decided to do this Korean flight.
Did he pick, which one?
I need my notes on the one with the plaque.
How did he decide what month he was gonna go?
Yeah, that's
when?
what I was just gonna say. You know what? I didn't pick the month. Bob Rice did. Okay, yeah, it was, from that flight, it was February 16th, 1995.
Okay.
I tell you why, the winter. All his flights in the Northern Hemisphere in the winter. And the winter was in order to avoid thunderstorms. And that's a reoccurring theme throughout all of his flights. All of his flights, he had to avoid thunderstorms. And in the winter, if you take the northern route, which is across the northern Pacific, and then it would be Canada if you were going across, and then from United States up to the North Atlantic, and then through Europe and Russia, and then across Japan, and then across the Pacific. That's called the northern route. And I must say, not one person has made it successfully around the world on the northern route. I personally have a feeling, after all these failed tries, northern route cannot be done. It has to be much lower. Even in the northern hemisphere, which is doable, it has to be lower latitudes. But Bob Rice picked the northern route. So Bob Rice picked it, and he picked it based on lack of thunderstorms in the winter season. However, meteorologists will tell you, while there's no thunderstorms, there's some pretty big low systems that form in the Gulf of Alaska. Big storms, big low circulations that I know have been responsible for at least 1 or 2 deaths of balloonists trying to go across. So, Steve Fossett and his team picked go over to Korea. I remember Nick Somm and I staying in constant contact, and Bruce Comstock, and they had a joke over there. Everything was 1,000 won. If you wanted to do something, you had to pay 1,000 won. Everything was 1,000 won. So that was of the flight. That was the 1,000 won joke. Everything was 1,000 won. You couldn't do anything without 1,000 won. Okay, so I was back, and I had my computer set up in my house in Omaha, Nebraska, in my den. And I would get up in the morning.
So you didn't go to Korea?
No. In fact, that's another very important thing. Throughout all my flights with Steve Fossett, I always worked out of my house.
You did?
I was always an independent cell. It worked great for a while, and finally when I was not on his team anymore, one of the tough decisions was would I join the regular cell and cell? No. I couldn't, because at that time I became after the Korean flight, I joined the staff at the College of St. Mary, and I was a professor.
Oh.
And I was teaching, and I just couldn't get away and spend time at all these places waiting for a balloon to take off. It doesn't work that way when you're a professor. But I could work from my home. And in Omaha, we have the most meteorologists there are in the world are at Omaha, Nebraska, because of the Air Force.
Really?
Air Force Global Weather Central is at Omaha, Nebraska, and we had well over 1,000 meteorologists there.
Wow.
Back in the Cold War days.
The hub.
Yeah, so we had, and I obviously coming from there, I knew all these guys, and so my team that I built for all of these flights had top Air Force meteorologists that spent the day doing their work and then would come and spend their evenings on my staff. So I had a
That's
very
pretty
good
special,
staff.
yeah.
Very good, they would come really knowing the weather and really up on things. So Steve Fossett and guys had to go to Korea, and they waited and they waited and they waited, and every day, based on certain times of the day when weather databases were updated, I would run the trajectories across the Pacific. Some of them, or the ones that we didn't use, would always loop up in terminal loops, and they would have crashed up in the North Pacific. The other danger is when you go across the Pacific, you loop the other way and get caught in a high pressure, and then you just go around and around and around in a high pressure. I might add that when the guy from the UK, Virgin,
Branson?
yeah,
Richard Branson?
Richard Branson,
Yeah.
when he flew around, you know, he took off from North Africa, and he made it to just about Hawaii, and the trajectories, his meteorologist showed the trajectory that he was going to be caught in this lower loop, this dead man's loop,
Yeah.
in this high pressure. So Branson and his crew parachuted out over Hawaii if you're up in that particular round the world attempt. So Branson got caught in this high pressure loop. I was very scared that Fossett would be caught in the low pressure loop in crossing the Pacific. So I would run the trajectories, found a trajectory which I have here. I have the final trajectory based on the observed weather. And this final trajectory shows that he would take off at a certain time in Korea.
Here, let's hold it up.
Oh, okay. Take off, the Korea's
Can you
up
see
here.
it?
Take off from a
see
precise
it?
time and climb to precise altitudes, and I ran his altitudes up and down based on the nights when he would be
Hold it up a little.
when he would be down, and the days when he would be high. Put them in the computers, ran the trajectories every 3 or 4 hours, plotted a track that would take him to Vancouver area, passed that on to him via fax machine. He liked it, and he launched. And it was frankly an uneventful, weather uneventful flight, and very successful. It was very eventful for Steve Fossett, however, and this is a first part of a recurring issue he had with every flight that I helped him with, and that is his cabin heater failed. Every first 4 flights, I have no idea about the 5th and 6th, the first 4 flights his cabin heater failed.
Don't you think?
Flight after flight after flight.
Did he send it back to the manufacturer and say, do something about this? I'm freezing to death.
His team worked on it very hard. When you get a chance to talk to them, let them tell you.
Okay.
I'm just going to say that.
Okay.
So poor Steve Fossett had to endure flight temperatures of -4 degrees Fahrenheit
Oh,
to
my.
-10 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh.
In this case, for 1, 2, 3, for 5, 6 days in a row. Extreme cold temperatures. So his balloon worked fine, that as far as I know. The weather was excellent. We had a good trajectory. It verified. He flew on past Vancouver and landed 200 and something miles east of that's east of Calgary, Canada. Broke endurance records and all that sort of stuff, and it was a very, very successful flight from a weather perspective and from a record perspective, but a very challenging flight personally for Steve Fossett because of the cold. Now, that's the things that I remember. Oh, one other thing about that flight. There was a command post set up for operations in England at the Cameron factory, and there was a command post set up for flight operations and public relations at Loyola University, and there was the weather command post set up at my house. So this particular flight had 3 command posts set up
And so did you have the final say and then you just spread it out, or did they each just add their little part in the area?
No, I did not have the final say, and that is a very important question and a very important answer that I hope I get it right, because part of the failure of several flights was because of that split command post.
Yeah.
Not this flight, but the next flight, all of his position data was automatically sent from his gondola to a satellite, to a receiving station on the ground, and to the United Kingdom for his first two flights. The United Kingdom would then, supposedly, when there was a change, would send out his position reports to me, and I would rerun the trajectories to make sure that he was doing well and all of that. The position reports were also sent to Loyola University, where they would take care of flight clearance issues and other issues. So it was important that those position reports got sent to us. At my place and at each of the three command posts, we could communicate directly with Steve Fossett via an early version of email, but they didn't call it email in those days, and it wasn't email, it was teletype computer transmission. We would type in messages, it would go to a ground station, up to a satellite, and then into the capsule. And Steve could also send direct to me, but the important thing was that the position reports went to one location. The first couple of flights, United Kingdom. Because Steve Fossett was very good at this, if somebody told him to climb, he would climb in the balloon. He would do what was recommended. We the weather guys could not tell him climb, go down, because that's not really totally a weather decision. It has to be made by the operations people in conjunction with the balloon people, in conjunction with the meteorology people. The three of you had to be in
Kind of in sync.
in sync. Otherwise, Steve could climb when he should not be climbing and waste ballast, because you have to,
Yeah.
or vent helium to come down when he should not be down, because all of that would go to reduce the flight, duration in flight. So there was a clear understanding that no decision was made by the weather people by themselves. We would always make the decision together, and sometimes the weather was the decision and overrode everything else, like when to launch and what were the initial altitudes. We would recommend, the first initial altitude should be, I'm gonna make this up, would be 9,000 feet, a flight level 9,000 feet. The balloon people doing the fuel would say, okay, 9,000's good. The other air traffic control people would say, okay, 9,000's good, and all this and that, and say, okay, excuse me, we'll have Steve go up to 9,000 feet. All right, just jumping ahead, on one of the flights that were terminated early, I think that system broke down. Now, that's my personal opinion. I think that broke down and the wrong word got to Steve Fossett. And so he dumped too much ballast, and that caused a termination of one of the flights early, because the three of us were not in sync as to what should go, or in that case, there was two command posts. In that particular flight, the two of us were out of sync, and that's unfortunate, I think, but that's my take on that.
Okay.
And we'll hit that later. So that was the Pacific flight. One last thing about the Pacific flight for historical purposes, I have no idea what became of this, but as Steve was about to take off from Korea, the Japanese government got a hold of the Korean government and said, stop the flight. Stop, do not let him launch. I'm surmising it was because of air traffic control problems. I'm surmising it was fixed. But at any rate, Steve Fossett took off on time, and we got the paperwork on that.
You're not gonna say what he said?
You know what? My paperwork tends to indicate Steve either didn't say anything or totally ignored him.
Ah,
And I'd rather think that they totally
Totally ignored him.
ignored him. pretended, can't hear you.
Okay, yeah.
Communication failure, say again, can't hear you.
I know, Malcolm Forbes used that quite a few times
Yeah.
when they told him he couldn't fly, yeah.
Yeah, I have a sneaky feeling that that's what it turned out to be. So that was the Pacific flight, and that was February 16th, 1995, is when we launched. It was 5,400 miles, broke all sorts of records, and that was a six-day flight.
Good. All right, now how long did he usually go in between flights?
At the time, there was a great balloon race going on.
Yeah, I know.
$1 million prize given by, I believe, Anheuser-Busch. I hope I'm right.
You're right.
An Anheuser-Busch $1 million prize. There were several teams, Jacques Soukup's team,
And what was the prize for?
for going, I'm sorry, very good. Going around the world non-stop in a balloon. Now, there was a rule with that. You couldn't go up to the 90-degree latitude and go zzz. You had to be between certain latitudes and go around. And so Fossett was still based on the northern hemisphere. He decided he wanted a route that was as far north as you could go, but yet still make the rules to go around the world successfully. So the first balloon around the world would get $1 million. There was a Kevin Uliassi flight. There was a Richard Branson flight team. There was a Picard team, and there was another team. I just had it, but I forgot. There were several teams going, and they were all going to go the northern hemisphere, the northern route around the northern hemisphere, and so they were all going to take off in the winter months. So Steve Fossett said, okay, we're going to keep trying every winter month, like all the other teams, every winter season, until somebody wins this prize. And he was going to win the prize. So that was the ultimate goal, besides being the first solo one around.
Because the rest of them were all teams, right?
Yes, yes. The rest of them were all multiple balloon teams. And they all had different philosophies, and they all took off from different places. Two of them, Picard and Branson, took off from North Africa. Soukup was going to take off from Albuquerque, and Kevin Uliassi ended up taking off from Rockford, Illinois. So they all took off from different places for this. Okay. So after the Pacific flight, we said, okay, we're going to do it again. Let's learn from our mistakes. Let's fix the cabin heater.
Poor guy.
Poor guy. Let's build a bigger balloon to get more duration. Yeah. I was always pushing to go higher.
How big was his first one?
I don't know offhand.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember. I'm
Okay.
sure we've got that someplace.
That's fine.
But I would always push, let's keep getting as high as we can go. Now, Steve was unpressurized, and you have to be careful unpressurized. And I know he had a secret. It's no longer a secret. He would sleep at night in a hyperbaric chamber, I believe you call it. At nights, he would sleep, and they would in a chamber like a iron lung for polio, except it was like a tent, and they would reduce the pressure. So at night, while he would, wherever he was, they would reduce the pressure so that it was like sleeping at 10. I'm going to make the height up because I don't know, 10,000 feet, and that way it would build up his heart and muscles and so forth. So we kept trying to push him a little bit higher in his flight to get around the weather and to get faster winds and to gain a competitive advantage. But he had to take off from the United States, and Steve decided on a place called the Strata Bowl in South Dakota. Beautiful place, a natural hole in the ground, where I personally, as a meteorologist, liked it because we weren't the people. Earlier in the 20s and 30s out here in your balloon museum, I saw a couple of the flights. I knew
Yeah.
exactly what they were, the Stratoball flights.
Yeah,
Where,
we've been there before.
okay, where the
it's
high
amazing.
altitude balloons would inflate and be at the bottom of the bowl, which is a very small but tight bowl. Winds would be blowing like crazy aloft, and you can inflate your balloon in near calm winds, and you can launch quickly, even though you'd have false lift, which would, which Steve did when we launched. It was a real shock, and he had to really fly through that false lift. But you fly up into that winds, poke through the false lift, and then you really move on out. So you can inflate in light winds and take off and get the jet stream as it comes by over you. So we picked the Stratoball, and that was our next flight. And if I could get that other pack.
Which one, the next, are they in order?
Yes, they're in order. Good, great, thanks. Sorry. Gonna edit this film.
No, we just put it
Or
together.
just leave it. Okay,
We're low key.
all right. Let me
Or
tell you,
low
I
budget.
personally.
What?
Low budget.
Low budget.
Oh,
yes.
very good. That's good. That's good.
Yeah. How much time?
Yeah,
Just keep going.
okay. So the Stratoball. We have essentially the same team. Cameron Balloons built the balloon, I believe. Yes, Cameron of the UK built the balloons. The command post is Loyola University for operations, Nixon, Comstock, all that, those guys. And I have my weather team in Omaha, Nebraska. I have a little bigger weather team this time, a little more formal because I have a whole year to get up to speed. I can train these meteorologists even more. They can even do a lot more background work. And